Welcome back to the Genesis Science Report. Now, it's no secret that the cultural dialogue surrounding science and faith has shifted dramatically over the past few decades. As biblical truth and traditional beliefs are increasingly dismissed and misrepresented in mainstream discussions, there appears to be a concerted effort to marginalize those who advocate for a biblical worldview. Recent findings from a Gallup poll show a substantial decrease in Americans' belief in creation, raising important concerns for those of us who are committed to sharing the truth of Scripture. Now, here with us now to examine the data is Dr. Dan Biddle. Dan is the president of Genesis Apologetics, a biblical creation ministry that provides free training to students across the U.S. Now, his background includes a PhD in industrial organizational psychology and over 20 years' experience testifying in state and federal court cases as an expert in statistics and research. Dr. Biddle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, David.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on to share. Listen, the Gallup poll that I'm referring to, this was all over Newsmax and a bunch of other news sources. It shows a sharp decline in the belief of a biblical creation, declining from 44% in 1982 to 37% today. That's about 19% decline. And the belief in evolution has increased from 9% to 24%, almost tripling. So I guess a couple of questions. Break it down for us. Is this accurate? Can't polls be skewed by the questions, the specific questions asked to the audience? And what should we know about this?
Yeah, well, I would say it is both accurate and it is consistent. So there is a significant trend line that's going on here that we can see as society kind of shifts in these directions where we're starting to deny the literal authority of Scripture and adopt a more secular worldview. We can even project out and say that these lines are going to intersect about the year 2032. So wow. In less than 10 years, we'll have, evolution will be the leading perspective on human origins, and the creationism is going to dip below it. So to me, it's not alarming. We can see this going on in the shift of our society and everything, but it is a consistent trend, and I trust the work that comes from Gallup. I believe it's a very solid company that provides reliable research. I'm sure the sample's large enough, but that's the trend that we see going on in society today.
Wow. Well, so how has the belief in the Bible contributed to this sharp decline? I mean, belief that the Bible was inspired or literal has decreased from 37% in 2003 to like 20% today. How has this belief in either a literal or an allegorical scripture contributed to this?
You know, I think it's really fundamental because as a smart person once said that the enemy doesn't have to burn all of the Bibles. He just has to get you to believe that the Bible that's on your bedstand is just a tab of paper. It's worthless. It's just a myth. And that's happened for the large part in many ways. Many pastors around America are not teaching from the authority of Scripture, and we see a sharp decline in the authority of Scripture happening in churches and in discipleship. So without an emphasis in raising our kids under the authority of Scripture, and without churches having an emphasis on discipleship as well, they're very enthusiastic collectively speaking about evangelism, but we have to be equally enthusiastic about discipleship. So without a lot of discipleship and without the Bible being taught in the home as an authority, we're going to see these trends continue.
So if this isn't reversed, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, when do your projections show that the belief in human evolution will surpass creation in the U.S.?
It looks like about the year 2032. So about 8 years, we're going to have a trend, because the trends are not linear. They're exponential, and so they're curvilinear. So they're going up exponentially. You can see creation has a significant tail dip that's projected. When you take that regression line and plot it out over a 30-year projection, we can see it dipping down, and evolution is going up even more exponentially. So it has even a faster uptick of the percentage of people that believe in it. And I think that's largely due to society wanting to reject God, but it's also due to a very intentional teaching from the left of evolution in our schools. For example, in the state of California, They indoctrinate students with 250 pages of evolution teaching, over 50 classroom hours of required teaching over the idea of evolution, and then you just have to ask the next question, well, what percentage of Christian families are teaching creationism at home or in church? And if that's much lower than the deliberate DNA that's being, piped into students in school, then of course we have that result. So, but of course, there's a deeper spiritual phenomenon going on here society-wide when you look at the Romans 1 road, where God promises very clearly, if you deny me as your creator, you're going to start taking a stair step to destruction, as we mentioned, we talked about earlier, and that's kind of the road that we're on. Of course, 2 Peter 3 also predicts this, saying that in the last days we should, he says, above all things, we should know that in the last days deniers are going to come, scoffers are going to come, and they're going to deny two things: creation ex nihilo, or creation out of nothing, which is exactly what the chart predicts, as well as the deluge by the worldwide flood. So those are the two things that are said in 2 Peter that in the last days are going to happen, and we're watching it happen in the charts right now. America's never been in a situation like this, where the spike is happening down and going down and hard on the viewpoints on creation, and up, tripling over 30, 40 years on the perspective of evolution.
Okay, so there is a chance that we can turn this around, and I'll go back to this in just a couple of minutes. But tell me, secular education, the public school system, institutions of higher learning, colleges, all around the world have contributed, and peer pressure has contributed to this decline. But talk for a moment about museums. How have museums reinforced the belief in evolution?
It's not some or not most, but it's all. Every single museum you go to that's either at a secular college or university or a public institution like the Smithsonian, they're really indoctrination centers. It's hard to walk through 50 feet worth of museum displays in any museum without seeing two things: evolution and millions of years. Those are the two things that they indoctrinate people with. And it's very, very, very thick. We're working right now with the International Association for Creation, and we're focusing on 7 cities to go dominate those cities, carpet bomb them with Facebook ads and Instagram ads that are pointing people towards creation tours. You can just go to christianmuseumtours.com, and we will put you with a tour guide who will go through a public secular museum, but see it from a biblical perspective, because these places are really becoming throne rooms to evolution.
Yep.
And one way to turn that around is just go through it with an educated creationist or parents that can take their students through a museum and compare and contrast. We're strong advocates, David, for teaching both views, because we want kids to know why evolution's wrong. And but of course, museums are really pushing this. It's not just museums; it's state parks, it's zoos, it's aquariums, the whole mix.
Absolutely it is. That's one of the reasons that we opened up the Wonder Center and Science Museum outside of Nashville here, is because I would go all over the country, all over the world, and I'd always walk into a museum, and it was, you mentioned it, almost like a shrine to evolution. It was almost like they deified Mother Nature through this magical, supernatural power that somehow it's creating the entire universe out of nothing. And I get so frustrated with that. Listen, let me ask you this question. Homeschooling, ever since, I guess, 2019, has seen a huge uptick, mostly because of the COVID pandemic. But
Yes.
Is that a potential answer to this alarming trend where there's this indoctrination going on?
I would say there's a lot of things that could cause a monumental shift in this trend. One of the leading things that could happen is, well, they found Noah's Ark. That's an obvious thing. Or they found a human inside of the stomach of a T-Rex. Something like that could really shift the perspectives. But aside from something like that happening, I think the number one shift I've seen over the last few years is exactly what you mentioned. the homeschool community, what, maybe doubling plus
Yeah.
over the last 5 or 10 years. That is the best thing that can happen, is for kids to be homeschooled or left in public school, but along with a lot of supplemental training about our faith and everything. But I think homeschooling can cause a huge shift, because it's over 90% of homeschool families teach from a young earth perspective. They're standing on the authority of Scripture. So yeah, that can be a huge shift right in our lifetime that we could see happen.
Absolutely. The thing we have to be so careful about, Dan, and I know you know this, is you can undo a lot of the things that have been perpetuated in children's books and on children's TV shows and all of that when you're going through the standard school system. But once you go to academia, once you go to colleges, there's a brainwashing technique that is again attempting to undermine everything that students know. Again, that's a lot of peer pressure involved. But it's something that is definitely a problem, something that we should be very concerned about, something that we should be actively working towards, and something that we have to keep our eye on. I want to have you back to address this in the future as well. I want to thank you for being on the show, Dr. Biddle.
That sounds great. Thanks very much for having me, David. Looking forward to next time.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, great.
Genesis Apologetics, a very important ministry. Be sure to check out Dr. Dan Biddle and everything they're doing out there.